Hi, Mindy here with Quilt Guild Boutique, bringing you another project for the 2022 show. This will be your August project. So Vicki and I are having a girls' weekend up at my cabin. So I'm coming to you from my quilting studio in my cabin. It's a very small space, but it has a beautiful view. Get to see all the birds. If you're lucky enough, you even get to see a snake on the porch, which Vicki and I got to experience, which really was not lucky. So Vicki's helping with the filming. So if you hear her voice, she's behind the camera. That's who's doing the filming today. So the project that we're going to make is a mug rug. So it's just a simple mug rug. You can make it however you want. So I chose for this one to kind of do a wonky log cabin. So what we recommend is you start with some kind of focal fabric and then build your color scheme out from the focal fabric. So if you're working on it at home with your own material, that's how I designed it. You do not have to do the wonky log cabin. You can do strips, you can do any quilt pattern that you want. Our goal is to have a mug rug that's about 10 inch by 7 inch. That's our goal. If it's a tiny bit bigger or smaller, you know the Quilt Boutique police will not come and get you. This one is not bound because we have a special binding technique that we want to teach you at the end of this video. So stay tuned for the end. All right, so with this next pattern, so the first one I showed you was the wonky log cabin, and with this pattern, we're gonna focus on using up some of those extra 2.5 strips you might have laying around your house. So this is gonna just be kind of a wonky stripped type of log cabin. So I'm starting out with this really fun focal fabric. I think this is really interesting and a fun one. And we picked out some coordinating colors to go with it. So I just picked that and I picked a gray. And I'm gonna sew these two strips together. Okay, I'm doing a little back stitch because I didn't start right on the edge. You know you don't have to back stitch, but that's just what I did because I didn't start on the edge. So here I am sewing my very first strip. Now, if I don't want to stop and cut, because this is a pretty long strip, I could go ahead and add a second one underneath here because this is going to be in multiple rows of these strips. So I'm just going to go ahead and stick another one under here. Really like this pink fun fabric, so we're going to use that a lot on this mug rug. Okay, so I'm just sticking another one under and going to town sewing. And this, because it's going to be a wonky stripped one, it will not matter if your 1/4 inch isn't accurate. It won't matter if your cutting isn't accurate. It is my kind of project because accuracy is always a challenge for me. Probably not for you because you're probably all really good quilters. So here I am. I've got these two little strips, right? Just going to cut them apart. I'm going to do a quick iron to press them open. And then I'm going to be doing some trimming. So I'll be right back. Hang on. All right, we're back. I got a couple of my strips sewn and ironed nice and flat. I did a few of them while I was working and you were not having to watch all that. So the next thing I'm going to do is cut it a little bit wonky. It doesn't have to be huge wonky. It can be as wonky as you want. And again, if you don't want to do this stripped type of pattern, you can make any pattern you want on your mug rug. If you want to make fancy star, or if you want to make the log cabin, if you want to make a cute little teacup or coffee cup, whatever you want, you can do. We're just giving you a quick, easy, fast idea, okay? So this is the wonky strip idea. So all I'm doing is cutting it on an angle like that. I'm gonna take my next strip. Here we go. Line it up and stitch away. All right, so here we are back. I added this next strip. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut that just a little bit, and I'm gonna cut it where it's wider down here and narrower up here. So kind of the reverse of how I did this wonky strip. Sorry about that. You might not have seen that so well with my ruler. And I'm gonna also, I would like to vary my strip thickness. So see how I'm coming in off the edge just a little bit here. So this is gonna be a little bit narrower strip. And then I'm going to go ahead and put this one on. Maybe this way. Put it on this way. I think that looks like a good progression. So I'm going to go put this. I had sewn these two together prior when we did a cut and took a little break. And I'm going to go ahead and sew this one on, iron it, and cut it wonky. And then I'll be back in a few minutes with the completed top. So you're just continuing with sew, iron, cut, sew, iron, cut, and keep them kind of wonky shape, how you would like it to be. All right, so here we are. I sewed some wonky strips together. You can see there's a couple that are angled, there's a couple that are thin, then there's a couple that are wider, just to give it a little more interest. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna trim up. I don't have to perfectly square it up because I'm still going to quilt it. I'm just going to trim it up a little bit. And my finished goal is about 7 by 10. So I'm aiming for my trimmed up goal prior to quilting is 8 by 11. So if you're off, don't worry, it's okay. Mine is not going to be at quite 8 by 11 because this piece here is just a tiny bit short. So I'm going to go ahead and trim. I just want this gray to be thinner. So this is, I'm going to give that, oh, maybe an inch. I just want that to be about an inch. I know that you all know how to trim up, but I'm just kind of giving you a little idea of how I'm going to finish this and get it ready for quilting. So while you're watching me do the trimming, let's just talk a little bit about the quilting. You can quilt however you want, of course, because, you know, we're made to, everything's about keeping it easy here at Boutique. If you would like to do a whole bunch of little lines, little straight lines, if you would like to stitch in the ditch, I did some stitching in the ditch on the first one that I made, but on this one, what I'm thinking about doing is some really tiny lines. Just to do like the Laura Heine little tiny lines that they do on her quilts. So that's kind of what I saw an idea on Pinterest. Just do a whole bunch of little tiny lines. If you want to use this piece to practice your free motion quilting, you can do that as well. And put in some fancy designs or fancy stitches. It is totally up to you, however you want to do it. Now the batting that we recommend doing, if you're doing this at home with your own supplies, is a low loft, thinner, 100% cotton batting. This is the kind of batting that I'm going to use. The reason why you don't want such a thick batting is when your mug is sitting on your mug rug, you don't want it to be too topply and fall over or anything like that, okay? All right, so here I am all squared up here on 3 sides. Just have to cut off this last side. And again, this was using up some 2.5-inch strips that I had. But if you don't have any 2.5-inch strips, you can use any scraps from your scrap bin. We just want you to have fun and help us make some products for the boutique at the same time. So here is my finished top. I think it looks really cute. And then here is my batting that I'm going to use. Now my back, you can do whatever you want for your back as well. Your back could be something pieced, so it could make it reversible, or you could even do solid or just straight muslin. It's whatever you have on hand, and whatever you feel like using. So I'm not going to show you the quilting. I know that you all know how to do that. Have fun and play around with it. And please let us know if you're going to be making one. Just send an email to Vicki or myself and let us know if you're going to make one so that we can just keep up with our inventory. So next up is Vicki. She's going to be showing you how to do a really fun binding technique.
So here's the finished top. Cute little mug rug top that Mindy made. Batting's in place. So for this, I'm going to quilt. I think I'm just going to do just some straight line through it that kind of echoes whatever the angle of the fabric is. Nothing drawn, nothing real straight, but nothing real wonky either. Just some organic lines going through it. Make it simple. This product would be a really good candidate for quilt as you go as well. So you could do a quilt as you go, put it down, sew it, put the next piece down, sew it. That would be a very fun, fast way to do it. Also, if you've got some fancy stitches on your machine you want to play around with, I always want the chance to do that. I don't get much of it, but that would be fun. Or just plain old practice your free motion quilting. Do whatever you want with your quilting. It's totally up to you. So after I get the quilting done, we're going to come back and we'll start working on the binding. The quilt is quilted. I just went with some straight lines, something just simple and easy to kind of go with this little bit of a modern look. The back is just this. In your kit, you will have pieces that are more strippy to do your piecing. You'll have one piece that is big enough for the backing, but you don't have to use it that way. I could have pieced this if I wanted to have a reversible, something different to have reversible. I still consider this reversible because the back is so pretty. So you don't have to use that big piece for your backing. If you want to piece the backing as well, that will look great as well, just whatever you choose to do. All right, so I have my binding strips cut. Now, this method does require an extra seam and a little extra material, but not a lot. But it sure is easy to put on a quilt and not have to do the hand stitching. So it's backwards from what I would thought it would have been. Once you think about it, it's not really backwards, but my simple little brain doesn't work that quick sometimes. The flange piece is bigger than your main fabric, okay? These measurements, this is 1 3/4 inch, and this is 1 1/2 inch. The difference between the two pieces will tell you the size of your flange. So the difference between the two is 1/4 inch. So doing this will give us 1/4 inch flange, which is great for this size of a project. It's really good for most projects. So I've got the two pieces pieced together so they're ready to be sewn together. So now I will just simply go and sew them right sides together and press that out, and then we'll just treat it just like any other binding, but we'll walk through that as well. So I'm going to go to the machine, sew this up, and be back in just a second. I've sewn my two strips together, so I have my 1.5 inch focus fabric, the focal fabric, the main part of your binding, and then the flange on the back. Now, if you'll notice, my flange came out a little bit skinny. So what happened was I just sewed a fat 1/4 inch seam, which is fine. For this project, it actually looks pretty good because it's such a small project. But if you're really wanting to stick with that 1/4 inch flange on a project, you really need to sew a scant 1/4, because once you fold your binding over and you sew it, it's just enough to take up just enough. So I'm not sure, I must have sewn like a really fat 1/4 of an inch seam, but you know what, it's okay. There are no photos of our projects. When we sell them at the quilt show, we don't have any photos. So no one knows what it was intended to look like. So it can look like however it gets finished. Case in point. So from this point, I'm going to kind of start with the way I normally do. I'm going to do my binding the regular way. Now, one thing I want to tell you, the 2 strips, when you sew them together, when you sew the 2 individual binding pieces together, kind of stagger, give yourself a little bit of extra in length and stagger your seam. So see, here's the seam for the flange when I join these 2 strips, and here's the seam when I join these 2 strips. The strips started off the same length, so I kind of had to stagger them just a bit so those 2 weren't intersecting, because it causes a lot of bulk and you'll have a pretty good bump. And for something that people are going to be putting coffee mugs and stuff, a bump might be a noticeable thing if they set it too far to one side. So just offset them by 1 inch or 2. You can see how much I did it, not much, and that everything comes out fine. So now I will take my clips and clip this around. I do my binding, typically when I'm binding a quilt, I glue. I use the Sharon Chambert's way of doing it. She's got a video on YouTube called Quilting the Angel, I believe. Hers does take a little bit longer because you're gluing everything in place before you sew it, but wow, your binding and your edge come out flat. There are no ruffles, there's no puckers, there's no anything. It's a beautiful, beautiful binding. This is so small, I'm still going to use her turning technique and stuff, but I'm just going to use clips because it's a small enough piece that I don't want to glue. Really, I'm lazy, I don't want to glue today, so I'm just going to go with the clips. But if it was a big piece, I would take the time to glue. So I will do that. I'm going to sew it all the way around like I normally would, and I'm going to join it the way I normally would. So you'll use your own favorite method of this first seam. Oh, you know what? I'm really glad I looked at that. All right, so you saw what I just did, right? I did the opposite. Usually we start on the front. We're going to start on the back, okay? And right sides together. So this is another oops. You have to think about where it's going because usually our binding doesn't matter. This it does. So think about where it's going, kind of work it around to make sure your flange is in the front, because if not, you'll sew it the wrong way all the way around and then have to unpick all of it. Ask me how I know. I've done it. So this is what typically I'd be gluing. So the first seam that I glue, I would always test before I sew. I glue, then I test, then I sew. Now I know this is going in the right direction. It'll come around. So when we're going to sew this is what we're doing. We're going to sew it here. Then we're going to, once that's sewed, we'll flip it around to the front. And then here we're going to stitch in the ditch right up against, right at this seam. And that's going to cover our seam that we do here when we sew it from the back. It'll cover that. So this is not the time to do a fat seam. So I'm going to test mine to make sure my 1/4 of an inch is a scant 1/4 of an inch, not a huge 1/4 of an inch. That way, once I flip it over to the front, my next stitching will cover. That will all cover that back piece. And you'd really have to do a pretty fat 1/4 of an inch to mess that up, but I'm perfectly capable of that. So I'm going to be paying close attention to that. So I'm going to go get that all set up, get the back done. I'll come back over, we'll flip it around and walk you through the front. But I bet you all of y'all have already figured this out, but I'll go ahead and go through with that just in case someone needs some guidance. All right, I'll be back in a bit. Okay, I've got it sewn on to the back. Now I'll just, as we normally would, turn it to the front. It ended up being a fairly big binding, but it's okay. I think it looks okay. If you want it smaller, you could do a little bit smaller. Your cut back a 1/4 of an inch maybe on both, and it would come out fine too. But this is easy to work with. The problem is this project's small. This is a really easier project on a process on a bigger project, because when it came time to turn these corners, and this binding is wide because you have to open it up to do all your thingies with this. It start on the long side. You'll leave your tail, go around and stop on the long side, leave your tail, because you're going to need that much room to maneuver. It was pretty tight. So Just warning. This is a good technique. It's a good little thing to try the technique on too. So now I will go and iron that over, roll it to the front, clip it down, and then I'm going to stitch right, let's see, here we go. Can you see that? Sorry. Right in that ditch right there, right in that ditch. I'll use matching color, white, for the flange, and just stitch right along that. And it looks really good, and that will cover, as it comes around, it covers up what we did earlier. So it's all machine done, and then we'll be ready to roll. Okay, I hope y'all have enjoyed this project. I'm going to come back when I'm all done with some last minute information about pickup and different things like that. So I'm going to go finish this, and then I'll come back with some housekeeping items. All right, all done. Here's the rug, ready to go. Remember, it's your design. You do it however you want to do it. Piece it however you want to piece it. Have fun with it. Practice your quilting. Do whatever you would like to do. Do your binding however you want to do your binding. We want them to be different. We don't want them all to be the same. We want them to be different. The size will be in the directions. They'll print out the list and the finished size. The finished size is also just thereabouts. Just whatever it ends up, it's perfectly fine. Okay, so the kit, you can pick up a kit from Quilters Crossing, or you can make from your own stash at home. The kit is very simple. You're going to just find strips of, we tried to coordinate the best we could. I think they're fairly coordinated. Strips, you can cut them up, you can strip them, do whatever. And then you'll have your batting, okay? And you'll have a piece that's big enough for a solid back if you want a solid back. If you want to add some of that to your back and piece it, go for it. You'll also have enough in there for binding. So kind of look at your pieces and see what you're doing with them. If you've got something at home you want to complement or sub out, knock your lights out. That's great. Now, there's not intentionally included enough to do the flange binding. So if you do want to do that, you'll have to find something from home that you have, or see what you may have in here that would be enough of it you could do the flange binding if you want to try that little process. Okay, so that's what's in the kit. You can pick up kits from Quilters Crossing. They're open from 10 to 2 Monday through Saturday. So stop by whenever you would like. There's a container behind the counter. Tell them what you're there for. They'll give you the container. Pick out what you want. Limit to no more than 2 kits. Sign it out so we'll have an inventory of what's gone out. And then when you're done with the product, you can take it back the next time you go into Quilters Crossing. We would kind of like that to start happening so we can kind of get an inventory of what we've got going on. But if not, if you don't go through that often, that's fine. Just hang on to it, and as soon as we get to meet in person again, and won't that be an awesome day that happens, we can pick it all up from you then. If you're making the product from your own material at home, if you could just drop Mindy or I an email telling us what you've made, just so we can add it to our inventory, so we can get a picture of what we've got for the 2022 show. Let's see, I think that is all I needed to be able to tell you. If you have any questions, as always, give Mindy or I a call, a text, or an email, and we'll answer as quickly as possible. Thank you guys so much for helping us through this whole virtual thing. I'm hoping it's going well for everyone. So far, the response has been fantastic. So we're going to keep going until someone says, hey, we don't want to do this anymore. So for now, we're going to keep going with it. Thanks. See you later.